it's impossible literally to confidently state the time period on which this happened. So it's hard a lot of times as we go through without you can do extensive study too, but sometimes it's just really hard to pinpoint what era of David's life that he was actually talking about. But we know at this point, according to Psalms 27, as we start at the beginning of reading this, we know that it was a very hectic time for David. It was a time where he was going through and he had some issues that were pressing him. He was being he had enemies and foes that were coming against him. He was fearful of what would happen. And so we see in these verses that his deepest desire, David's deepest desire, or his priority, was to be in the very presence of God, to be in the house of God. And so a lot of times we realize sometimes our problems and circumstances and situations are so hectic and so hard, and we're so hard pressed and overwhelmed that they will drive us into the very presence of God. So David's it looks here as we read this that David's problems drove him into the presence of God rather driving him away. I think our problems have two ways of working. They can literally drive us into the presence of God or drive us away. A lot of times we'll find ourselves in situations we'll go we'll tell people, oh, you're struggling, you need to depend on God, you need to seek God, you need to turn to God, so that you can be able to bear or get through your struggles or to have them cease and be over. But I also want to encourage us to know that it's important too that we should not just wait and allow our problems or our situations to push us into the presence of God, but that we should always seek to be in his presence, to always seek to be in his will, to always seek to be in the place where he is, so that we can live according to his will and according to his purposes. When we look at this text, when he says one thing I know, I want to give us I give us 5 different things that I see that the psalmist is telling us in this one scripture, verse 4. The psalmist desired this one thing above all things, that life could offer him, and that was to be in a relationship with God. He literally said, there's just one thing that I'm asking of the Lord, and it's the only thing. He has a one focus. He's only concerned about one thing. When life has so many things to offer us, and there are so many things that we could be going after, life really can give us some really some things that really seem to be really great. And we can really sit and kind of think about, do I want to do this or should I take that? Because it's very compelling to, have nice cars and a big house and all the money that you can conceive, and have the greatest job in the world, and to be able to do whatever you want when you want. But David's, above anything else, above anything that this life could give him, or even being or receive anything as king, he said there was only one thing that I had my focus on. And when we look through that, he talks about, I only wanted a relationship with God. He said, I wanted to be in the house of God. So when I'm in the house of God, that literally tells me 4 different things. When we talk about being in the house of God, David is saying, I want to be in relationship with God, which means that he wants to be one who is known as a son of God. He wants to be known as one that is in the family of God. The second thing is, he wants to be one who dwells with God and God dwells with him, because I can't just be in the Father and the Father is not in me. We see that in John 15 where he says, you abide in me and I abide in you. We saw that just a minute ago in Isaiah 57 and 15. I live with them and they live with me. So he says, I want to dwell with God. I want to set up camp. I don't want to just come one time. He literally says, I want to dwell. I want to stay here in the presence of God, and I want God to stay with me. Here's the third thing. He says, one who has the right to everything that God has to offer. When he says that I want to dwell with God and be in relationship with God, he's saying that I want to be one who has the right to everything that God has to offer. Only way that I can have everything that God has to offer is if I am in relationship with him. If I accept him and accept the death, the burial of Jesus Christ, if I accept him as Lord and allow him to dwell with me and I dwell with him, then I have the right to that. I have to be received through the spiritual adoption that Romans 8 talks about, so that I can cry Abba Father, and now have access to this inheritance that we share with Jesus Christ, that it tells us. Also, when we come in relationship to dwell with God, the last thing is we are one who has consistent access to God. And so, as David says, I want to dwell with you, he also says, in this relationship, I have direct access to you. Like, I don't have to have anybody else who to come on my behalf. I can come to you myself, that you are there. It reminds me, as we remember how the high priest was the only one who was able to go into the holies of holies and begin to pray on behalf of the people only one time a year. But if I'm like David and I'm going to dwell in the house of the Lord, then I have direct access. So my relationship with him allows me to become a son of his. I dwell with him, he dwells with me. I have access to everything that he has. I have the right to everything he has, and I have access to him. The second thing the psalmist tells us in verse 4 is that the psalmist had a goal that was a priority for him. So much so that he put all of his focus on that one goal. Here's the thing, for many of us, having a relationship with God is not a priority. And sometimes we ask ourselves, I wonder why. I think I was talking to, I think I mentioned this last week about one of my sister-in-laws. I was asking her, why you didn't go to church the other Sunday, and she was like, I don't know. And I said, well, I'll tell you why it's not a priority for you. Sometimes we allow all of our circumstances and our situations in life to take priority over our relationship with God. What do I mean? And I'm saying, like, instead of spending time with him in prayer in the morning, I would rather get more sleep or jump up and do something else while I have enough time to do it before I have to drive off to work. Or instead of going to church, I'd rather go and have brunch with my friends, or spend time with at home with my husband, or I just need to relax before the week starts. We have to learn to prioritize. If we're going to be in a relationship with God, we have to do like David and literally have this one goal in focus. And when we have that one goal in focus, then our priorities will be set up right, and then we'll be able to come into relationship with the Father. And this goes with any goal. As I tend to talk to a lot of people about goal setting and achieving different things in their life, if we don't have our priorities in place, those goals that we try to seek after, those goals that we want to accomplish, will never be accomplished because we are not focused. See, of us do not have the capacity to focus on more than one thing at a time. And so because we can't do that, we need to have our priorities set to focus only on this one thing, especially when it comes to our relationship with God. And you'll realize that as you focus more on your relationship with God, then you'll be able to achieve all the other things that you are trying to achieve in your life as it relates to your different goals. For example, when we look back at Luke chapter 10 verse 38 through 42, we remember or recall the story of Mary and Martha when Jesus came to visit the town, and he came into their home, and Mary decided to sit at Jesus' feet and to worship and to hear what he was teaching, while Martha was busy cleaning and preparing things, stuff that needed to be done. Absolutely, she was fixing dinner and cleaning and preparing so that they could feed Jesus. But the truth of the matter is, she didn't prioritize. Mary had one focus in mind, and that was Jesus is in town, and so I'm going to set my affections on him and to be able to receive everything that he has. She was not even bothered by anything else that was going on. She had one focus. And so we have to learn to have one focus, to be steadfast in establishing our relationship with the Father. Here's the second part of having a priority with our goals, is sometimes when our attention is divided between things that we desire to gain or accomplish, it can cause distraction and disappointment. So the truth is, sometimes I want this, but I also want this too at the same time. But the two are distraction. They're divided. They're not even the same. They don't even go together. And I thought of the scripture in Luke 16:31 where it says that you can't serve two masters. Like, you're going to love one and hate the other. So you have to make a decision on which one you're going to serve. And so sometimes if we don't have goals and we don't set our focus on that one thing, it becomes a distraction. And when we're distracted, it don't work out. And then what happens? We become very disappointed. And so, you know, you hear people say things like, you know, well, I tried to pray, or I tried to have a relationship with God. It's just too hard, and I want to do this and I'm trying to do that. But we have not really set our priorities straight. We have not really realized that when you make priorities, it also means that I'm sacrificing some things, because I need to put what's most important at top and set my goal and my affections on that one thing, so that that can be accomplished and see everything else follow through in my life. The psalmist also said, here's the third thing he says in this scripture, Psalms 24:4. The psalmist prayed about the goal he desired. David understood that only God could give him what he desired. So we understand that David's goal was to gain this relationship. He says, I want to dwell in the house of the Lord. He said, I want to have the relationship. I want to be identified as a son of God. I want to be identified as one who has direct access to God. I want to be identified as one who has the right to everything that God owns. And he also says, I want it to be known that not only do I dwell in the presence of God, but God dwells in me. And so in order to do that, he says, I got to make some priorities. And then the second, he says, I have to pray about it. Here's the thing. A lot of things that we're trying to accomplish in life, we're not praying about. We're not literally giving it over to God and laying it at his feet to see those things come to pass in our lives. David says, I want to be in the presence of God. So I'm going to go to the one that I know can open the door and let me in the house of God. There are things that will only happen in our lives if we seek God, because he is the one who has the power and the ability to make things happen on our behalf. But we have to go to him. He says, before you even ask, I knew it. You just have to ask, basically. I think about how what is that? 1 John talks about how we go before him confidently, knowing that even before we ask that it's going to be done, because I have the faith and I believe that God is doing this, and I believe that he hears me. And so he turns to God. So there are things that we're trying to accomplish in life. If we're going to accomplish these big major things, these ideas and these jobs, these careers and schoolings, relationships, then we must turn to God, the one who is the head of our life and in control of all of things that happen in the earth. Here's another thing David says. The psalmist not only prayed about the goal, but he sought after it. He desired. He put his faith into action. So there are times, so we do pray. Some of us do pray and we show that we have faith. But here's the thing. Faith without works is what? It's dead. So I got to pray about it, but then I got to get up and do something about it. David says, I want this relationship with God. I want to be known as one who dwells with him and he dwells with me. I want to be known as somebody who lives in this house. I want to be known as someone who has the right to the inheritance of God. I want to be known as one who has direct access to God. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to set that first in my life. Then I'm going to pray and ask God about it. But then I'm going to get up after I pray and I'm going to put my faith into action. So when we think about developing a relationship with the Father, we got to figure out what are the things that we do to build relationships. I can't just say, Father, I want to have a relationship with you, and then just sit there and never open my Bible. Never try to continue to pray, never include him in my different life experiences. If I never go to worship, how about that? There are some things that I need to do in order to develop that relationship. You think about, what if you want to have a relationship with somebody here? What do? Those same things. You talk to them, you get to know them, you share things with them, you open yourselves up to them, you become vulnerable, you spend time with them, you go places together. And so those are some of the same things that you have to do and David had to do to build this relationship. So he gets up and he says that he says, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. He says that one thing that I'm looking for, that one thing that I'm desire, he is that one thing that I'm going to seek, which means to search after, to go after what you want. And so when we talk about goals, we can't just say, or when I talk about, you know, I want a particular job, I can't just sit at home and just assume that somebody's going to call me. I'm going to